We're live to YouTube. We are live on YouTube and on Shaw.
Madam Clerk, so it's 4:32. Apologize for everybody. I imagine we're live, so I apologize to everybody who's tuned in for being a couple minutes late on start. Madam Clerk, you can get it going, considering the time.
Yes, we are live both on YouTube and on Shaw.
Okay.
I have a motion by Councillors Gardy and Vezo-Allen, resolved that minutes of regular council meeting of August 9, 2021 be approved.
All in favor? Motion carried.
And under agenda item 3, declaration of pecuniary interest, Councillor Shoemaker has declared a conflict with respect to planning application A1821ZOP, which is 1525 Trunk Road and 834 River Road, because the applicant is a client of the law firm.
Okay,
I don't have
And
any
then-
further.
no, any other conflicts, council? Seeing none?
Under agenda item 4, I've got a motion by Councillor Scott and Dufour, resolved that the agenda for September 13, 2021 City Council meeting as presented be approved.
All in favor? Motion is carried.
And under agenda item 5, proclamations. The first proclamation is for Culture Days.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. So I have a proclamation here. Whereas culture constitutes one of the main identity factors of the city of Sault Ste. Marie and the quality of life of its citizens, culture is an intrinsic component both of individual and societal development. And culture arises. The cultural community has set up an annual national event, Culture Days, that would consolidate a number of cultural events under a common theme, reimagine, across Canada by promoting the widest possible access to the arts, culture, and heritage. Whereas 2021 brings the 12th anniversary of Culture Days Sault Ste. Marie to encourage participation with a month of virtual content and a few face-to-face events and activities. Whereas Culture Days 2021 in Sault Ste. Marie will continue to highlight our diverse culture, our arts and heritage with a collective hub, Sault Ste. Marie Cultural Corridor. And therefore, I, Christian Provenzano, as Mayor of the City of Sault Ste. Marie, do hereby proclaim September 24th to October 21st, 2021 as Culture Days in the City of Sault Ste. Marie. Thank you.
And under agenda item 5.2, there's a proclamation for Ovarian Cancer Awareness Month.
Whereas Zonta International's mandate is to advance the status of women through service and advocacy. Whereas the Zonta Club of Sault Ste. Marie and area advocates for women's health through local service projects, in particular the Ovarian Cancer Awareness Campaign, and they ask the community to join them learning about one of the most deadly cancers among women. Whereas Ovarian Cancer Awareness strives to increase awareness of the disease, provide women care and support research to change the outcomes for those living with the disease. Now, therefore, I, Christian Provenzano, as Mayor of the City of Sault Ste. Marie, do hereby proclaim the month of September 2021 as Ovarian Cancer Awareness Month, and urge all citizens to share the information about this often overlooked and underdiagnosed cancer.
And agenda item 5.3 is the proclamation for Franco-Ontarian Day.
Whereas by virtue of the Franco-Ontarian Day Act, which was legislated on April 26, 2010, it is declared that September 25th of each year be recognized as Franco-Ontario Day throughout the province of Ontario. Whereas the Franco-Ontario Day Act 2010 recognizes the Franco-Ontarians commemorate September 25th to celebrate their culture, language, and heritage, and to take pride in their collective accomplishments. Whereas the Franco-Ontarian Emblem Act 2001 recognizes the flag as the emblem of the Francophone community of Ontario. And whereas French is one of 2 official languages of Canada, and the French language has been spoken in Ontario since the 17th century. Whereas the Franco-Ontarian Day has become an annual occasion to celebrate with the Francophone community of Sault Ste. Marie. And therefore, I, Christian Provenzano, as Mayor of the City of Sault Ste. Marie, do hereby proclaim September 25th, 2021 as Franco-Ontarian Day, and join the Francophone community of Sault Ste. Marie in celebrating its contribution to Ontario's growth and prosperity. Thank you.
And that will bring us to consent.
Okay, we are on the consent agenda. Council, do we have matters on the consent agenda? I'll start with Councillor Hollingsworth. Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you. The item is basically 6.3 corporate vaccination.
Okay. Go ahead.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, I would start with Mr. White, our CEO. Mr. White, my first question is, can you just talk about volunteers? In the report, in the policy, it refers to volunteers. I'm under the impression that includes committee members, or can you define volunteer?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hollingsworth, I'll clarify that right now the policy would apply to volunteers assisting staff with programming. We do anticipate to have another report to you at the next council meeting to talk about council members and members of boards and committees, which I think you're alluding to. Before we bring that policy, we do want to see the regulations that will accompany the announcement by the province of having vaccine mandates for certain facilities and businesses, which would include some of our facilities as we understand it. But we do want to see the actual regulations first before we address them with you. So we will cover that off in a subsequent report at the next council meeting.
Okay, that's fair. Just a few more questions to you, Mr. White. You mentioned about education session for certain staff members. Who will be providing the education session, and who's qualified to provide the education session in case there's in-depth questions that are really truly a medical question?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hollingsworth, that hasn't been determined yet as to which education packages and who will deliver them. Obviously, we will ensure that they are appropriate packages. There are packages being produced by public health now, and we would certainly make sure that they were being given by people who could answer the questions or would have people available that can give clear health answers to questions. We would also, aside from the mandatory education sessions, we would also work with any staff who wanted clarity on issues surrounding COVID vaccinations. We understand the amount of information and misinformation that's out there regarding COVID vaccines, and we understand that people have a difficult time sometimes getting through that information. So we will work with staff to ensure that they are able to get the most up-to-date and relevant information they need.
Okay. And my other question, once this policy, if it is approved, I'm sure it will be, will a copy of the policy obviously be given to each staff member? And if so, would they be required to sign off on a document to say they've received it, they've read it, and they've understand it? And would that be placed in their file?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hollingsworth, a couple of things on this. One, you aren't approving the policy tonight. This is a policy that comes under administration. So okay. Administration is implementing it. There will be a number of things we do to convey the policy, both to employees and if they're bargaining unit employees, their bargaining unit leadership. Whether we do have employees attest to that they've received the policy, or whether we do another method, there will be obviously some attestations being done to voluntarily advise us of their vaccination status. So I don't know specifically at this time which avenue we'll take, but it won't be an issue.
Okay. And my final question, it sounds like in the policy you stated that if the staff member has to go for testing, they have up to 6 weeks, I believe, where we would be paying for the testing. And can you elaborate on that, please?
Certainly. 6 weeks is the minimum amount of time that someone can start the vaccination process and end up being fully vaccinated. There needs to be 4 weeks between the first shot and second shot, and it's not until 2 weeks after the second dose that you are considered fully vaccinated. The city is prepared to cover testing requirements for staff who aren't fully vaccinated while they go through that process. Following that 6 weeks, though, if they aren't fully vaccinated, they will be required to pick up the cost of testing themselves.
And how would this apply to those that are exempted because of a legitimate health situation? Would they go ahead?
For staff who may have a legitimate either health exemption or a legitimate human rights exemption, we would work with them on a case-by-case basis. But normally they would need to be accommodated, and normally that would include something that we would look at as to cover ongoing testing, but we will deal with that on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, thank you. That is all. Thank you, Mr. White.
Okay, I have a list here, just so people are aware. The next on my list is Councillor Scott, then Councillor Shoemaker, then Councillor Gardy, then Councillor Vezawala.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through Mr. Mayor to Sia White. So in regards to an employee being considered fully vaccinated, right now that means 2 doses. Do we have a plan when this evolves, eventually being 3 to 4 to 5, whatever the current public health outline is? Are we prepared for that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Scott. As it notes in the policy, this is going to be a policy that evolves over time. We expect it to be continuously informed by either new legislation, public health advice, guidance, or direction. And whether there are legal decisions or arbitration decisions associated with it that we need to keep in mind, we will address those. Our response to the whole pandemic has been one of continuous evolution as more information came to light and more guidance was provided by public health. So we will adjust it as need be.
And in regards to staff members who will get 6 weeks of tests paid for, let's say that it does move into 3 doses to be considered fully vaccinated. Will we be offering the same accommodations to staff who are waiting to get their 3rd dose?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Scott, we will await specific guidance from public health to assess that and make decisions.
Okay, just going through my list here. I suspect the answer to this is going to be very similar. Do we have any criteria or targets for which, you know, when we reach, we'll stop with this policy, or is that just going to be once again whatever the public health guidelines are at the time?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Scott, yes, it would need to be informed by future public health advice.
I suspect as much. That is everything that I've got. I really do appreciate that. I think that it's very thorough and it's covered pretty much every base. So good work from staff, and thank you for the thorough and fulsome report.
Thank you, Councillor Scott, Councillor Shoemaker, and just note, I do have you, Councillor Bruni, I do have you, Councillor Nero. So Councillor Shoemaker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Mr. White. Mr. White, I note in your proposed policy that there's no mention of recreational facilities, but there is mention of them in the Ontario government press release as areas where vaccines are required. Are we interpreting the Ontario government's mandate to mean that anyone who goes to the John Rhodes or the Northern Community Center requires a vaccination?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker, we are interpreting the announcement to cover those types of facilities, but we are awaiting the actual regulation, which will give us certainty as to whether those facilities are covered or not.
Okay, and if not, would you be coming back to council with an additional report?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker, yes, we would need to advise you further at that time.
Okay, thanks. Regarding 4.4 of the policy, it talks about the city reimbursing the costs of testing for 6 weeks after October 5th. And then it doesn't explicitly say what is to happen after that, although it seems to be that the employee will be on the hook to pay for it themselves.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker, that's correct.
Okay. And then why, the final question on this policy, why was the 7-day period chosen and not the more common 3 or 4 day period that we've seen, you know, across other industries being implemented?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker. The frequency of testing, we've been looking more at municipal policies. There is a range, but we expect that frequency to be further informed in short order by public health guidance. It was really just today that I've received specific documentation from Algoma Public Health regarding their recommendation for these vaccine policies by employers in Algoma. So we need to digest that and get more advice on what the frequency should be. We also don't know at this time what the status of our staff are. So we have to assess what that is, and we will get that over the next 2 weeks. We also have to assess whether there may be different frequencies for different functional areas of work in the corporation. So we do expect that area of the policy to be modified as we go through the next few weeks.
Thanks, Mr. White. I just note that as counselors, we interact with a lot of the citizenry and a lot of staff, and for their benefit and for the benefit of all my colleagues here, I'm fully vaccinated, and I hope that they all are too.
So thank you, Councillor Shoemaker. Councillor Gardy's next.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I am fully vaccinated, Councillor Shoemaker. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to CAO White. I'm going back to 4.4, as Councillor Shoemaker mentioned. I'm just trying to, the rationale for reimbursing the employee for the cost of being tested for the period of 6 weeks. I would understand that to be a wise decision if we know the person is about to proceed and follow through on being vaccinated. But if we have a sense that the person is just not remotely interested in being vaccinated, I don't know why we would pay that testing for 6 weeks. I don't know if that's even something that we could do, but could you give me some background as to precisely why, if someone is not getting vaccinated and refuses to and does not have a legitimate exemption, why we would pay for their testing?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Gardy, it would be our view and our hope that through the process of if we have staff, and we don't know at this time if we do, that aren't fully vaccinated, that after finding that out, after taking them through an education program and having conversations with them about what's preventing them and hopefully allaying concerns they may have, that they would proceed with the vaccination process. Administratively, it makes it easier to administer. And we would hope that sometime during that 6 weeks, we are able to convince a staff who is vaccine hesitant to proceed with it. We don't see it as, we don't expect inordinate costing for that part of it.
Excuse me, for what part of it?
For paying for testing for people who are adamantly
Understood.
Anti-vaccination.
Understood. And then I just have a quick comment. I kind of, well, I don't know if I agree with Councillor Shoemaker, but where he was going with the 3 to 4 days, I thought the testing should be a bit more frequent, but you also mentioned, Mr. White, that you're awaiting a little bit more information for public health. So I appreciate that as well. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, Councillor Vezoel.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. White. Mr. White, the reason this policy is coming to fruition and that you've been working on it, it's under recommendations by Algoma Public Health. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Vezoel, as you would see, this has been a very fast-moving emerging area of policy. The province has directed that certain employee groups must have a vaccination policy, specifically in the areas of healthcare, retirement home workers, emergency EMS, in other words, ambulance. In the case of other employers having vaccination policies, it has become a recommendation, not just from Algoma Public Health, but other regional public health authorities. What we're really doing is living up to our obligations under the Occupational Health and Safety Act to ensure that our workplaces and facilities are safe for all employees and all users and attendees of those facilities. That's really what's driving the need for a vaccination policy.
Yeah, and you note the occupational health and safety under 1.1. Going on to just one more question, when we're looking at contractors and subcontractors, which is listed in 2.3, how, and then just to go connect that with our policy 6.1 of confidentiality, for, you know, the testing and all of that information is kept confidential under 6.1. When we're looking at subcontractors, how is that information going to be transmitted from, you know, the subcontractor to the corporation? And how are we ensuring that transfer is within that confidentiality policy?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Vezo-Allen, we need to abide by privacy legislation and other relevant legislation for everyone, whether it's contractors, subcontractors, or employees. So we certainly will have an eye. I won't get into the specifics on it because we're still developing it, but we will comply with the relevant legislation in those cases.
And just one last question concerning the regulations of activities and centers. I know now, you know, post-secondary institutions, students need to be double vaxxed to enter and things like that. So in the case of the senior drop-in center, do we know that what's going to happen potentially, because that would be a place where they're getting recreation, that they would be required to show proof of vaccine as well for seniors to participate?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Vezo-Allen, we don't have certainty on that because we haven't seen the regulations, but from the announcement that was put out by the province, we would expect senior centers to come under that provincial vaccine mandate.
Okay, no further questions. Thank you, Malcolm.
Councillor Bruni?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple questions to Mr. White. Mr. White, if all city staff require the vaccine and there's a mandate on the education, the ones that don't want the vaccine or have not received the vaccine, where does the city stand on that if they do not go to the mandatory education sessions?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bruni, if they chose not to attend the mandatory education sessions, they would not be complying with our expectations of them as employees, and we would have to take disciplinary action, which could result in up to placing them on unpaid leave. We would hope that obviously that wouldn't be the case, and that when we talk about mandatory education sessions, as I've mentioned, it's no different than attending education sessions for any area of health and safety with the employer. And we would really hope that they would attend it and be able to have conversations with us.
Okay. And I believe Councillor Shoemaker and Vezo-Allen touched on this. Maybe you can explain further. If all city staff must be vaccinated or the mandatory education, what about our city facilities? If our staff are all vaccinated, what about contractors, fans, students, players, etc., that enter our buildings? What happens?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bruni, we expect to be able to give certainty to those answers at the next meeting, once we've seen the regulations that are passed regarding the provincial vaccination mandate. I would note that many user groups of our facilities have come up with their own vaccination policies and are demanding that participants in their programs be fully vaccinated before they're allowed to participate.
So if they're allowed to participate, how are they monitoring it? Are you aware We'll speak of the Greyhounds, for instance. How will they monitor spectators to go into the arena being double vaccinated?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bruni, we don't have the final answer to that. Well, the OHL has come out with their policy that dictates that they only want people who are fully vaccinated to attend the facilities to watch a game. We have to work out how that would work. It's our expectation that that eventuality will be covered off through the Ontario vaccine mandate. And we will work out the details with how we enforce that or ensure compliance with it as we get closer. We have to see the legislation that's going to accompany the announcement and proceed from there. So we do expect to have more information to you at the next council meeting regarding this.
And just another follow-up question. Say, for instance, at a Greyhound game, the individuals that work the canteen selling products, they would have to be double vaccinated because would they be city workers or would they be Greyhound employees, we'll say?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bruni, if they are canteen staff, they would be our staff and would be covered by our employee policy. If they are staff of the Greyhound store, I'm assuming they are staff of the Greyhounds, and aside from our own policies or the Ontario vaccination mandate, they would be covered by the OHL's vaccination policy.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Nero.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I only have one question. Mr. White, regarding the policy 2.3, again with the contractors and subcontractors, where it reads that if there are in any of the city's workplaces, are we specifically talking about workplaces inside our facilities specifically? Or is this outside work as well?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Nero, that's a good question, and we're still working out exactly how that will be implemented. It certainly would apply to any indoor facility or site, but with the outdoor facilities, we're still getting some information on that.
So while you're looking at this information, are you also considering if we do requests for proposals or RFPs that a condition is that the contractors be vaccinated?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Nero, certainly those are issues that we need to canvass and address in the coming weeks.
Thank you, Mr. White. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Christian.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. White, for the presentation. And I appreciate your comments regarding occupational health and safety, the intent of the policy. Given the fact that 75% of the population is vaccinated, this is really, what the public really wants to see. My question to you is, you indicated that the city would be paying, at least for the first 6 weeks, for the tests. We're not sure how much that's going to be, but where would the funds come from?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Christian, we would have to see the exact amounts that are, or get an estimate of what we would need. They would more than likely be able to be absorbed in our operating budget. And since it's a COVID-related expense, we may well be able to use either Safe Restart funding, or because this is an emerging area, we may see future funding from the province to help cover costs such as this.
Thank you. One more question. Obviously, this is a pretty robust policy. Can you just comment on your communication with other municipalities? I guess I want the public to know how this might compare to what other municipalities are doing, or any conversations you've had with them in terms of, the policy being consistent with them.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Christian, certainly we've had conversations amongst the CAOs of the other northern municipalities. as well through the legal department, through the human resources division. They have been talking with their counterparts throughout the province. Our policy really aligns with what we've seen so far from other municipal policies. That being said, all of us expect our policies to evolve over time. It's been a very quick timeline, but we are responding to the timelines that are forced on us by the pandemic.
Thank you very much. That's it for me, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, I don't have anybody else on my list, but 8 of you spoke, so I think that's probably pretty much it. Just want to add my comments. I want to thank city staff for their work on this, for clarity of the general public, that the policy that we're discussing applies to our employees. As an employer, we have an obligation to address the health and safety of our employees, and we're doing these things in accord with those obligations. As the CEO indicated, it is an administrative level policy, and they do not need council's consent to implement it, but it appears to me that it has wide support on council. I certainly support it. I just want to clear up some questions that I think a number of us have received. The discussion tonight does not include the decisions to be made on municipal facilities. The municipality isn't in a position to mandate vaccines across the city. It's not a discussion that we're having. We have some responsibility to have policies for our own municipal facilities. That is not at this meeting, because after it was intended to be, the province made announcements that appear on the face of the announcements to cover our facilities. We didn't want to introduce information to council that was incorrect or unclear, so we're waiting for the regulations on those provincial directions. And once we receive those, we will bring the matter to council, and if there's a decision for council to be made at that time, it will make that decision. If there isn't a decision to be made, if those decisions are essentially made through the provincial regulations, we'll certainly be following the provincial regulations. So with that stated, we can move on from this matter, which is 6.3. Councillor Hollingsworth, I was with you. Do you have other matters?
I do. Item 6.5, the downtown plaza.
Yeah, so before, Councillor Hollingsworth, I'm just going to stop you. Before you get into that, I wanted to give it some context for council and the discussion. When this matter, and then we'll start with you, but I just wanted to give some insight here. When this report came to Agenda Review Council, it was my suggestion to the CAO and the clerk that the report should be put on to the next meeting's agenda. It seemed like a natural thing to do. I was told that there was reason for it to be on this agenda, and staff's preference was for it to be on this agenda. So I wanted to start at that point, because if council wants to make this decision in conjunction with the decision that will be at its next meeting, we can have that discussion from the outset, as opposed to getting into the details on this report if we're just in the end going to defer it. And I'm not prejudging your decision. You might not decide to defer it. But if you did, I wanted to get to that first, as opposed to getting into the substance of the report. And I wanted to start by giving Mr. Vera an opportunity to explain to council why staff wanted the report here today. And so you'd have that context before we started discussing it substantively. So Mr. CEO, Mr. Vera, whoever wants to kind of address that, I welcome you to address that at this point.
Turn it over to Mr. Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you to council. Electrical servicing work that will need to be done really no matter what form the plaza project proceeds in. The work that's being contemplated here is primarily turning this into a public space, so moving the overhead wires underground. PUC had scheduled this work for the beginning of September, when we originally had conveyed our timeline to them to advance the project. Obviously, we had a setback, and we hope to come back to council on the 27th. With that said, we do have the schedule lined up for them to complete this work. We also have some businesses that are adjacent to the plaza that we're looking forward to and counting on this work being done in the near future to advance some projects of their own. And so we thought we would bring it forward to council to see if we could get approval just to advance this portion of the work to allow it to be completed. It will ultimately benefit the site long-term. As I said, it will make it into a public space, and it'll prepare the site for future development and allow us to proceed closer to the timeframes that we're hoping to proceed on, should council approve the overall project on the 27th.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Vera. So with that context, I'll go back to you, Councillor Hollingsworth, and you can ask whatever questions you thought relevant. And
Thank you.
I see the hands. Thank you.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. I am very glad that you made that clarification, because you're absolutely dead on what I was trying to get at. So just to make sure that I understand, through you, Mayor, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Ver. So if I understand this correctly, at our next council meeting, another report's coming back to us with further information about the downtown plaza, because it's my understanding that obviously we have not totally approved the downtown plaza, but it sounds like hypothetically, if the downtown plaza doesn't go through, this electrical work is still needed for this public space no matter what. And it sounds like you're saying there's still a benefit to the businesses in the area. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hollingsworth. Yes, basically to convert the space now into a public space, we're looking at taking the wires that are overhead wires and moving them underground. So that's the primary reason for advancing this work now.
Okay. So again, unfortunately, if the downtown plaza for some reason did not go ahead, we definitely had to get this work done anyway.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hollingsworth, if we were to convert that space into a public space in kind of what we envision any configuration, this is work that would be, required to be done.
Okay, thank you. That's all.
Councillor Nero?
Mr. Mayor, procedure?
Okay, Councillor Schillinger?
Unless Councillor Nero is going to move to defer it, I'd put a motion to defer this until the next meeting.
Well, listen, let me go to Councillor Nero, and then I'll come to you next, Councillor Shoemaker. So whatever Councillor Nero was going to ask here, he could get.
Yeah, I think, and I think, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think to Councillor Shoemaker's point, it's along the same lines, but I need to get some answers before I think that way. Mr. Ver, you said, I heard you say that the other businesses need this work done by the PUC regardless if we go ahead with the plaza, or regardless if we go like with any type of plaza?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Nero, the work is really being done for the plaza's purpose. There is some benefit to some of the adjacent businesses there for this work being done. But if we didn't go ahead with the plaza and we didn't do this work, that would be something they would have to take on their own to relocate services.
And just so I understand, if we did not go ahead with this, these other businesses would be doing that work, with electrical work?
That, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Nero, yes, that would be correct.
Okay, and then just one other question, Mr. Ver, what would be the impact of holding this back until next meeting?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Nero, it's more a matter of the scheduling of this work and the availability of the scheduling with the PUC and getting the work done. So it's not fatal. Well, it can be pushed back. But however, we thought it would be beneficial if council was favorable to advancing this work. We could allow the scheduling to proceed as it is scheduled to be done now, avoid that kind of break and the pushback in this work, and get the work taken care of in anticipation of some work being done in the plaza in the future.
Understood. So the work could still be rescheduled as long as we don't get into a winter season where we're talking frost and things like that. We have that much time.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Nero, that's correct. And that's in part what we're trying to avoid by allowing this work to take place now.
All right. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Varon. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. to Councillor Shoemaker's question, I certainly am of the same thinking that we defer this to the next meeting.
Okay, so we'll move to Councilor Shoemaker in a second, and he can move that, and I take it you'll second that. But I wanted some clarity here. I was a bit confused by Mr. Veer's comments. Mr. Veer, so if this is deferred for 2 weeks to the next meeting, could the PUC accommodate that rescheduling to get on the work if it is approved? And 2, would that be too late to start it this year?
To you, Mr. Mayor, the PUC will likely be able to reschedule work to push this back. Our hope is that the work would be able to be finished this year.
Okay, and that's still possible if it is deferred for 2 weeks by council.
To you, Mr. Mayor, yes, we believe that's correct.
Okay, so Councilor Shoemaker, your motion is to defer this report and this decision to the next immediate meeting of council to come at the same time as the report on the Plaza project?
Yes, exactly, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, and Councilor Nero, you second that?
Certainly. Yes, I will.
Okay, so that's we're on the deferral motion now, council. Any questions or comments on the deferral? Seeing Councilor Nero?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just very briefly, the only, the basic reason is that I would like to see everything come together. And basically, Mr. Veer has kind of, made it known that we're not impacting the project if it is a go-ahead, at the September 27th meeting. I think that's important. I wouldn't think of deferring it if it, jeopardized, this thing going ahead. But I think that decision has to be made on the 27th.
Yeah, my impression from Mr. Veer's responses was that it does not jeopardize it.
Correct.
If I understood correctly. Councilor Dufour?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just to comment on the motion, I'll not be supporting it. I'll be voting against the deferral. I think that if the PUC wants to get started on this work sooner rather than later, from a construction point of view, it makes a lot of sense to get on this faster in my mind. In addition, regardless of our future decision of how much of a plaza to do, I think it makes a lot of sense with all of those different parcels that the electrical servicing be done whichever way council votes, whether we have the Taj Mahal of plazas or whether we have a stripped down version. I think it's something that makes a lot of sense to do now. So I won't be voting in favor of the motion. Thanks.
Councilor Vezoil?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Veer. Mr. Veer, currently the space is, it's been removed of all buildings. Is there lighting in that area? And will there continue to be lighting once this work is done?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Vezoil, and there is lighting in the area in the parking lot. And our plan was to keep the lighting throughout this winter. We'll delay that as long as we can until the construction begins on the plaza. So there will be lighting that remains in place.
Will this work have the ability to enhance the lighting in that area? And I'm thinking as well, when we're doing, when we had all the PUC do the lights for the month of December with all the decorations, would that be able to be accommodated in that space?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Vezoil, and I believe what we'll be left with is similar to what we have today, so it won't enhance it in the short term. With that said, should the Plaza project proceed, there will be enhancements that would make that type of lighting display come about a lot easier.
Okay, I'm in agreement with Councillor Dufour, especially we don't know what our weather can bring, and I think this is work that needs to be done. It's necessary. Just like if you're, putting a foundation in, this needs to happen regardless of what the plaza outcome is. So I don't support the deferral. I think, take advantage of getting it done so that we don't run into bad weather, that it can't get completed by the end of the year. Thank you very much.
Okay. Anybody else on that? Okay, seeing none. All in favor of the deferral? You leave your hand up for a second so I can count. Okay, so I have Counselor in favor of the deferral, Counselor Christian, Counselor Bruni, Counselor Shoemaker, Counselor Scott, and Counselor Nero. Okay. All opposed to the deferral? Hollingsworth, Hilsinger, Gardy, Dufour, and myself. So is that are we short one? Oh, and Venezuelan, I missed Venezuelan. So the deferral, on my count, Madam Clerk, I think the deferral fails. Did I get that right? You're on you.
That is correct.
Okay, so now we're back to the main motion. So questions on the main motion? Comments in the main motion? Okay, so that just is going with the rest of the consent agenda because we haven't pulled it from consent. So does anybody else want to speak to 6.5? Councillor Hollingsworth, do you have any other matters on consent?
I do. Item 6.14, 2022 capital transportation. And through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Don Elliott.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Can you just clarify, in your report, you made a statement that there has not been any increases, I believe, to the capital transportation programs, meaning no, not for inflationary, I believe no real increased dollar amount portion to the capital transportation. Can you just clarify what you mean by that?
Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Hollingsworth, what I mean by that is the city's portion of the capital budget that's traditionally gone to roads transportation has not increased. There's been, I think there's always, fair to say, there's always been some significant grants for roads. Right now, the gas tax, which started at $1 million or so, is now up to 4.5. That all goes to roads. And the OSIF funding, which is about $2 million every year, that goes to this program as well. But the base budget from the city's perspective hasn't increased.
And if I read this right, for over 20 years, you've been basically over 20 years, you've been pretty much working with the same pot of money?
My recollection, yes, is that that's been flat. There haven't been increases to it.
And I know that many of us during budget time have been trying to push for you to increase this amount, including myself. So again, over 20 years, that's the number?
Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Hollingsworth, yes, I believe that's the number. It may be more than that.
Wow. Okay. Thank you for that clarification. Second question. Can you, Mr. Elliott, confirm something? I believe you and I have talked about this, or maybe in the past PUC. When the PUC has some work that needs to be done, some underground services, do you work in collaboration with them to come up with a plan? I know that sometimes they have construction projects going on for improving underground services. How does that impact our roads?
Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Hollingsworth, the main thing that where we, the PUC always, with very few exceptions, replaces their water main when we dig the road for storm and sanitary sewer. Clearly, it's the time to do it. The PUC has many runs of water main that they need to replace. So our schedule doesn't move along fast enough for them. So what they've done is they're doing some trenchless work now. They're lining some existing water mains. The hope is that when we get to redoing those streets, we're going to be able to work around those mains, but that's how the PUC is addressing their infrastructure deficit without digging the whole street. They've taken on some water main lining projects. That's the main item that the PUC wishes to coordinate well with us. We do consider some of their mains. If we have a road that's close to being really needed to be done, we will, and they have a lot of water main breaks on that road, we'll try to fit that into the plan.
Okay. And one last question with regards to capital transportation in the basically project. Are there any other municipalities, to your knowledge, that have implemented a policy to say that for capital projects, for capital transportation, that each year council will automatically apply a 2% increase to at least to align with inflationary?
Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Hollingsworth, I can't tell you, I don't know what specifically the other northern municipalities do. I know when we get together, the other, my colleagues at the other centers, they are equally frustrated with lack of funds because of the size of the infrastructure deficit. So I think we're all sort of fighting the same battle.
Okay. And just the last comment, I believe PUC has some policy similar to a 2%, which you and I will talk about offline. I would like to see this change as we move forward, especially a good discussion on this again with this upcoming budget. Thank you, Mr. Elliott. I feel for you. That's all.
Kate, anybody else on 6.14? So Councillor Hilsinger.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have more of a comment, but I would certainly invite Mr. Elliott to respond in however he thinks appropriate. So I really do have to point out that I believe that a monumental shift is happening in how we think about how we use our money, and the fact that we continue to call this a transportation plan, not a roads plan. I hear it, I see it, I get it. And it is, we are shifting how we think and how we prioritize how we spend our money. I know we have a new active transportation plan coming up over the next 6 months or so. And I do hope that we start to see, instead of wording in a report like this about that active transportation infrastructure improvements are proceeding either along with another project or being incorporated into larger projects, that this plan that we're about to undertake in the next 6 months is going to have its own wheels, if you will, we assign funds specifically within our transportation budget to improve things like active transportation with a solid plan in place, and where our infrastructure gets significantly improved. We know it's important for the health of our community. We know it's important for affecting the reduction in our greenhouse gas emissions. And so we're on the right track. And thank you for listening, and thank you for undertaking this in a different way. And Mr. Elliott, if you care to share anything about that, I'd appreciate it.
Mr. Mayor, excuse me, Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Hilsinger. Yeah, these tend to be very large projects. I hear your sentiment. There are some big AT projects that we have on the go right now. Third Line has a hub trail spur, a hub trail quality spur, connecting the hospital down to the cycling lanes on Black Road. And also the one local street that we're doing this year is Mark Street. And that's one of the reasons that it worked its way up the list maybe faster than others, as it's a missing link in the hub trail, and the hub trail will be constructed at least between Churchill Boulevard and Lake Street.
Thanks, Mr. Elliott.
Anybody else in 6.14? Seeing none, do you have anything else, Councillor Hollingsworth?
No, I don't, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Councillor Shoemaker, you said you had matters on consent.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think it's 6.15, Blake Avenue reconstruction.
Yep, go ahead.
Through you to Mr. Elliott. Mr. Elliott, this thank you for the informative report. There's discussion, this ties into 6.14 and 6.15, but there's discussion in 6.14 about the next 5-year capital plan. Do you expect when we might see that, and can you give any hints as to whether or not Blake Avenue might be in there?
Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker, it's fair to say that when you see the list of streets it's a 2-year capital plan that we're showing you tonight, but there's a group of streets under deferred projects and considered projects below that list. And essentially it's staff's opinion, at least from the engineering division, if there's a project on there, we do intend to blend it into the next 5-year plan. So Our intention would be when we come back in probably late spring or summer of 22, that we would be recommending a program that will include Blake.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful.
Anybody else in 615? Councilor Bruni.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And question to Mr. Elliott. In the report, it said $256 per meter of frontage. So average property would be 3,900 for a property that is 50 feet wide. Now, how do you notify these residents on Blake Street that you're going to be changing, repairing the road in Class A service, I guess? How do you go about that? Because now they're going to be paying approximately $3,900. How do they pay that? Is it in a payment program? It's on their taxes, obviously, etc.
Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Bruni, what will happen there is the residents, when we do decide to do the road, the residents will get a notice in the paper. We will have an open house. They will be able to ask questions. And typically after the construction is complete, there's about a 2-year gap from when the local improvements have to be paid. The residents will have the opportunity to pay it in full if they so choose, or they can put it on their taxes for 10 years at the prevailing interest rate set by the chief financial officer.
Okay. Thank you. That's all.
Okay. Anybody else in 615?
Yep.
Councilor Nero.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Elliott, Councilor Bruni brought up the local improvement charges and sparked another question in my mind. The cost is in there for local improvements for residents now because they front on Blake. The businesses that front on Great Northern Road but backyards are on Blake, how are they assessed?
Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Bruni, it's a good question. First, I think they would be charged. I'm sorry, Councilor Nero. I think they'd be charged at a reduced rate. I believe if we did Great Northern Road and they were charged, they would pay a certain amount and a reduced rate on both sides. But I'd have to check that for you to be sure.
Okay, but there would be a charge, correct?
Yes, yes, I'm pretty confident there will be a charge for the business owners and the properties that front on both Great Northern Road and Blake.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Elliott. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, anybody else in 615? Back to you, Councilor Shoemaker.
I'm happy to continue, Mr. Mayor, but it is 5:30.
Oh, yeah, you are correct, and we have matters in the planning agenda. Thank you for that. Madam Clerk, we're going to come to you then for the planning agenda.
Under agenda item 7.7.1, application A1521Z, 207 Daisy Road. There is a motion by Councillors Gardy and Bezo-Allen resolved that the report of the planner dated September 13, 2021 concerning rezoning application A1521Z be received and that Council rezone 207 Daisy Road in the following manner. Rezone Block A from single detached residential zone to medium density residential zone R4, and rezone Block B 95 meters of frontage along Daisy Road and 32.5 meters of depth from single detached residential zone R2 to low density residential zone R3, and that Block A be deemed subject to site plan control as per section 41 of the Planning Act, and that the legal department be requested to prepare the necessary bylaws to effect the same. And we have Karen Jarris, the lead presenter, and Daniel Fremlin present.
Okay, thank you, Madam Clerk. I don't see Mr. Fremlin on my screen, but I do see, I think, Mr. Jarris, and we have Mr. Tanazo here. Mr. Tanazo, are you here on behalf of planning on this matter?
Yes, I am, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, so before we get going, I'm going to ask you to give the council and folks at home a summary of the matter.
Okay, thank you. It's the former St. Hubert's Elementary School. It's located on the west side of Daisy Road. As the clerk mentioned, the applicant does wish to renovate the former school to accommodate 19 dwelling units, and then also rezone a portion of the Daisy Road frontage to accommodate 4 semi-detached dwellings for a total of 8 units. And then the remainder of the school yard property in behind will remain vacant at this time. The recommendation is to approve the application, save and except for reducing the rear yard setback for the proposed semis. The original request was to reduce that rear yard setback by 1.5 meters. However, planning staff's of the opinion that given the large vacant acreage behind the proposed semi lots, there's really no demonstrated need, and the lots can easily be increased, either increased by 1.5 meters or the size of the dwellings reduced, or a combination thereof. Furthermore, based upon the proposed size of the semis, the decreased rear yard and by extension lot size could easily result in future applications to increase lot coverage in the event that future owners want to construct a storage shed or a small garage. Of the tipping point there would be about 121 square feet, or 11 by 11, which really is quite small. So the recommendation is to maintain the existing rear yard requirement. And the applicant's planning consultant, Mr. Kevin Jarvis, I did see he is present and will take the lead in addressing this proposal on behalf of the applicant. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Mr. Chinazzo. I did see the applicant log on. Welcome to council. And I understand, Mr. Jarvis, you're speaking to the matter. Do you have anything to add on behalf of the applicant?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship and members of council. My name is Kevin Jarvis. I'm a senior planner at Tulloch Engineering, and I am acting as agent on this application. First of all, of course, thank you to everyone around this table for considering this application tonight. It's been a bit of a long and winding road to get here, but we really want to thank, of course, council for the consideration, and of course, staff for all the hard work that they've done on this file. We really appreciate the support. I'll keep my comments very brief. I think the planning report, which is in front of everyone today, does a very good job of summarizing the application, and we certainly agree with the conclusion of city staff, in that certainly in my professional opinion as a registered professional planner, this application is consistent with and does conform to the relevant planning policies, provincial and municipal, which are applicable to this property. As Mr. Chinazzo has already outlined, the application is 2 parts, really. The first is to rezone the former St. Hubert School on Daisy Road from the current R2 zoning to an R4 medium density residential zone, to allow for, again, the conversion of that existing structure to allow for 19 interior units. At this time, no exterior changes, alterations, or expansions are proposed, other than your typical facade improvements, which would go along with the redevelopment of this nature. And then, of course, the second part of the application, as Mr. Chinazzo has outlined, is the application to, or the ask to rezone a portion of the frontage of the remainder of the parcel to an R3 zone, to allow for 8 semi-detached units in 4 semi-detached blocks to be allowed fronting directly onto Daisy Road. Again, we agree with staff recommendation to approve the applications, of course, but I will speak for a very brief moment to the site-specific requests that we've made for the townhouse blocks. Of course, we appreciate and understand that the zoning bylaw does call for an as-of-right requirement for a rear yard setback for developments of this nature of 10 meters. I will be fully transparent in saying that I am not from Sault Ste. Marie. I am a planning consultant from Sudbury, and as such, I regularly work within what I would call a different planning framework than Sault Ste. Marie. But if time allows, I'll speak a little bit to kind of the intent for that reduction. In my work in both Sudbury and other jurisdictions, typically the requirement that we see, and certainly in the actual city of Sudbury itself, the requirement for rear yard setbacks of this nature would typically be 7.5 meters, whereas Sault Ste. Marie's bylaw requires the 10 meters. Quite typically, we found, especially more recently, there have been requests through various applications to reduce even the city of Sudbury's rear yard setback requirement from, say, 7.5 meters to 6.5 meters. And that is largely owing to a change or a shift in the market to facilitate living arrangements, largely for seniors or those looking to downsize from single detached dwellings. And what we've often found is individuals looking to downsize into, say, semi-detached 1 or 2 story dwellings from larger single detached dwellings is a desire for less outdoor space to maintain. And a less of a need for outdoor amenity area for, say, typical, younger family kind of activities that may occur in a single detached kind of environment. The reduction in the rear yard setback that we're asking for here will allow for the property owner to respond to that market reality, which is a reduction in, again, that outdoor amenity area that was typically sought in the past. And will also allow for, and this very much speaks to one of the comments in the staff report that says that there is no demonstrated need for the reduction in the rear yard setback. And certainly my opinion in that regard would differ in the sense that Mr. Tanazo was quite right. There is a large parcel in the rear, which is not subject to this application at all. It will be likely subject to a future application. And the design or the layout of that future development in that rear area is at this time unknown. However, given, again, that market reality that a full 10 meters over 30 feet of backyard is no longer typically desired from the market, and given that the overall development of the remainder of the parcel at this time is unknown, and it is possible that given that vacant area in the rear is relatively constrained from an ability to develop it for, say, your more typical plan of subdivision, single attached, or a development that would be on a municipal road, that rear area is constrained from a development layout perspective, at least with the information that we have at this point. So the extra 1.5 meters, while it may seem relatively insignificant, we are looking to minimize the constraints that we will see when and if the rear of the property is developed. And that reduction in the 1.5 meters may allow us to design a layout and a development in the future, which is in fact more consistent with the bylaw and may allow for development, say, on a full municipal road rather than another form of development, maybe on a condo road or some other form of development design. So kind of those two considerations put together, again, one, the response to the market, and second, the potential need for the 1.5 meters in the future, while insignificant, it may be helpful, is why we've presented the application in the way that we have. And we're certainly hoping that council may support that request. But again, we certainly appreciate that staff has supported the overall principle of development, which is being enabled through this application. And I'm open to any questions that you may have, either in terms of the overall concept that we presented here, or that site-specific, relatively minor request that we've made. So with that, again, thank you to staff and thank you to council for tonight, and I'm open to any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Jarris. Mr. Freeman, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, he hit that pretty good. That's exactly what I want to do.
Okay.
I have some ideas for the rear portion of what I'd like to do in the future, but until I see what the market's like in the Sioux and things like that, I'm going to hold off on those until I kind of play the market out for the next year and see where we're at. But right now, there's no real plans for the back.
Okay. Thank you for that, Mr. Freeman. So, Madam Clerk, do I have anybody registered to speak in opposition to the application?
No, I do not.
Okay. So council, any questions you have for either Mr. Tanazo, our planning staff, or the applicant itself? We'll take those now. So I'm going to start with Councilor Nero, then I'm going to go to Councilor Dufour.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can we, Mr. Tanazo, can we ask you to speak to the comments regarding the rear yard setback?
Sure. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Nero,
you know, and Mr. Jarvis and I did have a brief conversation just before the meeting, and I certainly don't disagree with what he's saying, and it is relatively minor. So I certainly don't want us to get bogged down over this meter and a half. I guess to respond, I would suggest that, again, there is a pretty large acreage in behind. And I think that the meter and a half could be accommodated within that acreage. I would also suggest that certainly, you know, the target market right now and for the last 5 to 10 years has been seniors wishing to downsize. But when you look at household headship rates throughout the province, it's not just seniors downsizing, it's also young families looking to get into the housing market. And as housing costs and building costs have continued to skyrocket, Sault Ste. Marie, you know, the starter home in Sault Ste. Marie generally and traditionally has always been, you start with a single detached dwelling, but that's certainly subject to change. But ultimately, you know, it's anybody's guess as to how the market may go in the future. Just to say that the target market right now is seniors, but that's, you know, seniors, you know, landowners come and go, and the semi-detached dwelling is still there. So you'd hate to preclude one's ability to purchase this because there's too small of a backyard, or they have to come back to the committee of adjustment because they want to put up an 11 by 11 shed. So that's kind of where we're coming at this, and that it's a fairly large semi-detached dwelling on a pretty small lot, which is what's necessitating the variance. But certainly if council decides that the 1.5 meter variance is appropriate, then again, it's fairly insignificant. We could live with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tenazzo. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Before we move on to Councilor Dufour, I'd like, there's a point that Mr. Tenazzo's raised, which I thought about when I looked at this myself. When you look at the size of the building that you'll build on the lots, you really are limited based on our bylaw to the size of any second structure you could build. So in that sense, Mr. Tenazzo's approach frankly made more sense to me, Mr. Jarrison, the approach that you're proposing, just because you'd be really hamstringing any potential buyers of the property from being able to build a garage that was bigger than the garage that Mr. Tenazzo's identified. Do you have any comments on that?
Yes, certainly. Thank you. And if this application was looking to facilitate your more typical single detached dwellings, then the forward-looking idea of how do you enable those larger, I would call them, accessory structures would be part of the consideration here. However, these are semi-detached lots, semi-detached units, which do not have the ability afforded to them to allow for a detached garage like you may see on your more typical larger single attached lots. And certainly the future ability for anyone to develop an accessory structure which would either be, say, not meeting setback requirements or not be under that lot coverage requirement of the 30%, would be looked at on a site-specific basis at the Committee of Adjustment through a typical site-specific variance application. And I would even say that anyone looking to purchase one of these units in future would be cognizant of the fact that that the lots are relatively constrained, or should be cognizant of the fact that the lots are relatively constrained from a future ability to add detached accessory structures. So my response to that would largely be, again, the market will what's the best word? Decide for itself, I guess you could say, or determine who are the most who are the people or the purchasers that would be most appropriate to live in these units or to purchase these units. And if they wanted to do anything in future that was over and above the bylaws requirements or standards, then that variance application would be quite appropriate, and the review of that application should be done on a site-specific basis. And if the lot coverage provision has to go up to allow for a larger accessory structure, then that would either be appropriate or not appropriate based on the review at the time. But again, I will speak to this not only being a consideration of wanting to reduce the amenity area in the rear to respond to the market. This is also about still maintaining that additional or gaining that additional 1.5 meters so that the larger piece of this puzzle, which encompasses this property, has more flexibility and has more room so that we can potentially develop something in the rear, which for all intents and purposes is closer to other existing residences, where in that rear area, we may not be wanting to, or it may be less desirable to reduce these standards like we're asking for on this application for lots that are more further removed from existing residences. So Mr. Tanalis was absolutely right. It's a relatively minor ask. It's certainly not going to be the straw that breaks the camel's back on this application. But from our perspective, it is a minor ask which will facilitate, again, that flexibility down the road for the larger part of the property and the design and the consideration of how best to locate lots on that larger parcel so that they're more in keeping with or more compatible with those existing structures or existing residences that are surrounding that larger parcel.
Thank you, Councilor Duford.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. My first question is for Mr. Jarris. Mr. Jarris, just for clarification purposes, these semi-detached dwellings that we're debating, did they have attached garages already?
Yes, they would.
Okay, so it would be pretty safe to assume that if they already have an attached garage, then any accessory building would obviously not be used for parking. It would just be a shed or something to that effect for some outdoor storage.
Absolutely, and I also know, just looking at the sketch that's in front of everyone now, we are only providing the 3 meter side yard setback, which is the required side yard setback under the bylaw. 3 meter space to get a vehicle around into that rear area for a detached garage would be quite difficult. And also, as you said, because there's already that attached garage, we're certainly not anticipating that future need or desire from the purchaser to have a detached garage, which would typically, again, as I had said, be seen more in your more typical single detached, larger 50-foot or more lot.
Thanks, Mr. Jarris. Mr. Mayor, my next question is for Mr. Tonazzo. Mr. Tonazzo, just looking at some Google map view of the area, I see that there's some very similar type semi-detached structures immediately across the street from the proposed property that we're discussing tonight. You wouldn't happen to know what the rear yard setbacks were for that development, would you?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Dufour. Unfortunately, Councillor Dufour, I don't have that information at my fingertips. My apologies.
Fair enough, Mr. Tonazzo. I didn't give you any advance notice of this. I will say, from seeing those other units and looking at them here on Google Maps, many of them have been lived in for a number of years now, and I don't see any evidence of other accessory structures anywhere in the backyard. So for whatever it's worth, I do support the reduction in the setback. I'm keen to see, hopefully, the best development possible in the future for the rest of the property there. I think that these kinds of intensification projects are really important for our city and for future growth. So that is something that I would support with the future growth in mind. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Okay, do we have anybody else that has questions of either the applicant or Mr. Tonazzo? Nothing else? Okay, so we have the.
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, I was going to go to you,
Sorry.
Madam Clerk, to read the resolution.
I believe that Councillor Hollingsworth wants to declare a pecuniary interest with respect to this item.
Councillor Hollingsworth?
Yes, sorry, when I read the report, I just was focusing on Tulloch, but Mr. Fremlin is a relative, so I just want to state that.
Okay, so you'll be declaring conflict. That leaves the 10 of us. So, Madam Clerk, we've got the vote up. Have you read the resolution?
I
I don't
have.
think you have. Pardon me?
Yes, I did read it initially.
Okay. All in favor? Carried. Any opposed? The application is approved unanimously. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you very
Mr.
much.
Conlon.
Thank you.
And agenda item 7.7.2 is application A1621Z, 812 Frontenac Street. The motion is by Councillor Scott and Dufour. Resolved that the report of the planner dated September 13, 2021 concerning rezoning application A1621Z be received, and that council rezone 812 Frontenac Street from rural area zone with special exception 58 to rural area zone to repeal special exception 58 from the property, that subject property be removed from site plan control as per section 41 of the Planning Act, and that the legal department be requested to prepare the necessary bylaws to effect the same. Adrian C. and Tim C., the applicants, are on the call.
Okay, Mr. Tenazzo, did you want to speak to this?
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The subject property is located, it's on the north side of Frontenac Street. It's about half a kilometer west of the east city limit. Special exception 58, which is being requested to be removed. Essentially what that is, in the early 80s, council rezoned the property to permit a petroleum maintenance business. The business no longer exists, and the applicant wishes to essentially downzone the property to remove that special exception and revert the property back to the rural area zoning, which is consistent with that of surrounding properties. The recommendation is to approve, and Mr. Tim C. Will be taking the lead on behalf of this application. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. C., did you want to speak to the application? Mr. C., I don't know if you're sure if you're on mute, so I'm not sure if you're responding to me. Madam Clerk, do we have anybody else registered to speak either in favor of?
Hello?
Yeah, hey, Tim, Mr. C., did you want to speak to the application?
Well, basically, it's in line with what the councillor had said. We just want to dezone the property to remove the special exception.
Okay. You're referring to Mr. Tenazzo, one of our city planners.
Yes.
So, Madam Clerk, do we have anybody else registered to speak either in favor of or in opposition to the application?
Mr. Mayor, I did have a neighboring property owner, Mr. Gronsky, who was given particulars to call in. I believe he spoke to staff and was undecided at that point as to whether he was going to join the meeting to make comment, and he has not called in.
Okay. So, Council, do you have any questions of either Mr. Tenazzo or Mr. C? Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you. To Mr. Tenazzo, thank you, Mayor, through you to Mr. Tenazzo. As the city clerk alluded to, I actually did receive a call from this particular constituent, and he said he wasn't going to be able to speak tonight, but his concern was dust. He was under the impression that potentially there could be a long driveway, which could create dust. And he was hoping that the person that's requesting the rezoning would work with him and other neighbors to reduce dust, potentially putting lime down or some substance. Mr. Tenazzo, can you comment on that? Again, he was under the impression a long driveway was potentially going to be created. Is there something that we can help our constituent with around this?
Right, I don't think that has anything to do with the rezoning application. Am I incorrect about that, Mr. Tenazzo? That's not.
Mr. Mayor and Councillor Hollingsworth, so I did speak with the neighbor today, and yes, his concern was dust. Generally, that would be a civil matter in this particular instance. I believe the property at one time was actually a landing strip, so it is a very long, narrow, relatively narrow to its length property. There is a long driveway, but the overall effect of this application really is to revert it back to residential. So in theory, there would be less traffic. In the conversations that I had with the neighbor, I did note that I was going to reach out to the applicant likely tomorrow to suggest that maybe he could work with the neighbor to put some kind of dust suppression down or something like that. But from a bylaw standpoint, and I certainly, I would defer to legal on this or maybe building, but I don't know that we have a bylaw right now that would be able to address a dust complaint of this nature.
Okay, so on the planning matter, do you have any other questions that relate to the application, Councillor Hollingsworth?
No, I just want to represent the constituent. Thank you. It looks like he's been well represented. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions of Mr. Tenazel or the applicant? No, seeing none, we can have a vote on the matter now. All in favor? So Mr. C, your application's been approved. Thank you for attending tonight.
Thank you very much.
Bring us to agenda item 7.7.3, application A1721T, 1259 Peoples Road. The motion is by Councillors Gardy and Dufour. Resolved that the report of the senior planner dated September 13, 2021, concerning application A1721T, 1259 Peoples Road be received, and that council temporarily rezone the southeastern portion of the subject property, being a 37-meter frontage by 200-meter depth, from rural area zone to rural area zone with a special exception. 2, in addition to the uses permitted in a rural area zone, permit a gravel employee parking lot in association with the adjacent industrial uses at 1195 Peoples Road for a period not to exceed 3 years from the date of passing of this bylaw, and that the portion of the property recommended to be rezoned be deemed subject to site plan control as per section 41 of the Planning Act, and that the legal department be requested to prepare the necessary bylaw to effect the same. And Anthony Aiello has joined the call on behalf of the applicant.
Okay, Mr. Tenazel, we'll start with you before we go to Mr. Aiello. Did you just give a short precis to the council and all the people that are watching tonight?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The subject property is on the west side of Peoples Road. It's about 170 meters north of Third Line. It's bounded by SIS Industrial Group and EACOM Timber Corp, and kind of an industrial area to the south, and Talek Boulevard and a residential area to the north. And then you've got the residences across the road on the east side. The applicants wish to, again, rezone about 3/4 of a hectare of the southeast portion of the property to accommodate a 60 vehicle employee parking lot. There would be no heavy trucks or truck traffic using the lot. And again, this is for a temporary basis for the period not to exceed 3 years. And as the clerk has mentioned, Anthony Aiello, the mill manager, is present to address this application. Thank you.
I see your hand, Councilor Nero, but we're going to go to Mr. Aiello first. Welcome to council, Mr. Aiello. Did you have anything that you wanted to add on behalf of the applicant?
Thank you. No, just as was mentioned in the application, the idea is to address some safety concerns. With the current location of our parking lot, it requires our employees to walk through the yard where we store our lumber, and it also would free up some space to divert the truck traffic that currently has to line up and wait on a section of Third Line until it can be loaded or unloaded. It gets that traffic into the existing parking lot in a safer spot. And the main driver behind this is the safety of our employees, and to also alleviate, we believe it'll alleviate some traffic at an already very busy intersection on Third Line and Peoples Road. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to try and answer them.
Thank you very much, Mr. Aiello. So I've got Councilor Nero, then Councilor Bruni.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Either to Mr. Tenazel or Mr. Aiello, I have no problems. I have some concerns with the application, but I understand the reasoning behind it. The first question I have is, if the parking lot is being built for safety reasons, why is it only for 3 years? Why is it a 3-year temporary? Are there other changes that are going to happen on this property?
So for the reason it's for a temporary measure is in order to fully implement the changes we want to make for the truck traffic, we'd like to get the approval from ECOM to do some investing on the existing parking lot, to do some office spaces that would allow a check-in place for those trucks. And if we can get that investment going forward, then we would look to have that on a more permanent basis. Right now, we need to free that space up in order to try and get that investment going. And this also gives the community around the opportunities to show that, this parking lot, will be maintained, will be taken care of, will only be for employee traffic. And then we could look to see if it would be needed on a longer basis.
Yeah, so I guess after the 3 years, if you don't get, the response that you're looking for from ICON to do that work on the present parking lot, you have other options. You think that this parking lot will remain as a parking lot for employees?
Well, ideally.
Ideally, it would stay there. Okay. Thank you for that. Mr. Tenazzo, the property in question, I believe, is 151 meters in frontage, and we're rezoning 37 meters only. So that leaves a buffer of 104 meters to the next property. And I'm not sure, I don't have the numbers, wouldn't show it in the report. I'm just trying to get an idea of what is the distance that we're looking at between the north end of the subject property, well, let's say the parking lot, and Tulloch Boulevard, which is an area where we've had some concerns that were addressed because of, or that were brought forward because of dust control and noise. So is that distance of 104 meters plus another civic address on top of that, is that something that we would look at as a buffer zone? Or is it past that? Is that area too great to be asking for a buffer?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Nero, I think ultimately the rural zoning, like we're only zoning the southeast portion of the property. So in theory, that means that the remainder of the property is going to stay that it is. And the zoning was structured to just rezone that portion of the property to keep that as a buffer. So I think at this point in time, that is a buffer. And I think it's more than appropriate in that this isn't really, although the parking lot is in association with an industrial use, we don't look at this as an industrial parking lot, and that it's more of a commercial parking lot. It's passenger vehicles. There's no truck traffic that's going to be utilizing this site. I think the biggest thing is to make sure that, and again, to what Mr. Aiello said, the 3-year temporary was really so that the community could see how this works and that staff could see how this works. Because I think the key piece here is to keep the dust control down and to make sure that AECOM is on top of that. So I guess it took me a long way to get around it, but I would say that, yes, that is a very much an appropriate buffer, as is the 90 plus or minus 90 meters from the abutting or adjacent homes on the east side of People's Road for a commercial parking lot.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Tenazzo. And you kind of spoke into my next question, which is the dust control. I certainly don't have any reason to believe that ICOM would not follow through with dust control. But normally in these kind of applications where, the indication is brought up by the applicant that there will be application of dust control, is something like that not usually in the application as in your report as a consideration? Or is it taken for granted? What I'm saying is should it be written in as a condition?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Nero, it wasn't written as a condition. I think we would approach that through the site plan control agreement. And okay, that's probably a better way to enforce it.
Very good. Very good. I have no problem with that. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Tenazzo, and thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Hey, Councilor Bruni.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Couple questions to Mr. Tonazo. Councillor Nero did comment about the dust. But is there any vegetation going to be taking down trees in this new parking lot?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bruni, my understanding is that there may be just a little bit of vegetation taken down along People's Road to get the access in, but Mr. Aiello may be able to answer this a little bit better. Very, very minimal.
Yeah, there's a few small trees bordering right around our property that the access might impact. And like you said, there's a possibility that the entrance might affect a tree or two, but there's no real aging or mature trees. And we have some flexibility that if there is anything that at the entrance, we might be able to adjust the entrance slightly to avoid that. But there's very, very minimal vegetation in that area.
Also, what will you be using for the base of the parking lot? What type of material?
So there is, sorry, just if you can give me 1 second here.
Sure.
There's some aggregate that we got. I just need to find the estimate here.
Councilor Bruni, how does this go to the fundamentals of the planning application?
Well, the residents are concerned about dust, and also I just would like to know what their base will be for the parking lot, Mr. Mayor. Are they asphalting it, or are they going to put gravel?
No, so sorry, we got grade B and grade A granular, compacted granular material, and we will be having an asphalt apron at the 10 meters closest to the entrance. And then, as mentioned, there would be dust control with a calcium coating as needed, depending on weather conditions throughout the year, as we do for the rest of our yard.
Okay, and my final question, one of you can answer, regarding the snow pile during the winter. Would it be closer to People's Road, or will it be towards the west end of the property?
So we know that there is some concerns about the drainage. So we could try and ensure that the majority of the snow piling could be done towards the west end of the parking lot. Obviously, there would be some around the parking lot based on just ease of clearing, but we can make sure any piling is done closer to the west end.
Thank you.
No problem.
Okay, councilors, do any other councilors have questions for the applicant or Mr. Okay? We've got two, so we'll go Councilor Hilsinger and then Councilor Shoemaker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Both Councillor Shoemaker and I, and he'll certainly speak to this on his own as well, have received significant objection to this idea on the basis, and I hate to bring it up, but it's noise and dust and smell. And I really feel for them. I'm hearing stories and I know there are other industrial businesses in this area. But I'm hearing stories like we can't be outside. We hear noise 24 hours a day. We can't be outside because dust covers our seating areas around our home and so on. And so I don't feel like we've got control of this space. And now we're just, we're talking about adding to it. So Mr. Tonazo, I don't know, and perhaps Councillor Shoemaker would weigh in here as well at this point. I'm not, whoever would like to go next, sorry.
You don't have a question, Councillor Hilsinger, you just wanted to make that comment.
Okay, good point. I have a very serious concern, which is not a question. I just want to reiterate that I don't feel like the concerns of the neighbors are being addressed. And until I feel that way, I feel very concerned about actually voting in approval of this matter. So anything that anyone could say who could help allay those concerns and allay the concerns of the neighbors would be helpful in my ability to want to vote in favor of this.
Okay. Councilor Shoemaker, did you, I'm gonna come to you because you had your hand up next.
Yeah, I think along the lines of what Councillor Hilsinger's concern is to Mr. Tenazzo, when planning applications come before us, like this one does, it's an opportunity to, correct situations that have been existent since either before a zoning bylaw or that are non-conforming to some degree. I guess if there are noise and dust concerns at this location now, and they've got a planning application before us, is there a way to use this planning application to try and mitigate some of those concerns?
Would you like me to respond to that?
Yeah, I think the question is to you, Mr. Tenazzo. So do you understand the nature of the question?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor, to councillors, I believe Shoemaker and Hilsinger. To your earlier point, Councillor Hilsinger, yes, we do have these legacy situations in Sault Ste. Marie, whether it's Algoma Steel, this industrial area, we've got it on Sackville Road. We've even got some kind of adjacent to the downtown where you have some of these older traditional industrial areas that are right beside residential areas. And this industrial area has actually expanded over the years, whereas the residents have pretty much stayed the same. So I think to those neighbors, they've seen more activity, they've seen more products coming and going. Ultimately, that is in part why staff was fairly adamant that this go for a 3-year temporary only at this point, because we wanted to see how it went. Now, this is anecdotal, but my understanding is that a lot of the dust is actually not necessarily, obviously it's a field right now. So, the dust isn't, the dust is potentially coming from the Third Line West area where trucks are doing what they're doing. And the dust is coming not only from EACOM, but from the entire sort of industrial area. So we don't see this really as an expansion to the industrial use. It really is just adding a commercial parking lot or an employee parking lot. There's no rules now that obviously these developments predated that, but the Ministry of the Environment, or now called Ministry of the Environment, Conservation and Parks, they have minimum distance separation criteria that would apply. So if EACOM or any of the industrial use, or vice versa, the residential uses, wanted to expand, there's certain studies that they'd have to do, and ultimately maybe there'd be a berm, maybe there'd be a sound wall, vegetation, or a combination of all three that they would have to do if, for example, EACOM wanted to expand onto their industrial process onto this property. But we're not looking at this really as an industrial expansion. We're simply looking at this as an employee parking lot. And part of the safety net, if you will, is that it's for a 3-year period only, at which point it can be revisited.
Okay, it answers the question. I guess the answer, the more direct answer is, if there are corrections that can be made at this property, they can be made in 3 years if they come back for a full rezoning rather than a temporary one. Am I interpreting your answer correctly?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, but ultimately this is also a different property than the industrial property. So the rezoning is on, this particular subject property. The industrial area is south of this. So I'm not sure that this zoning, whether temporary or permanent, would give us the ability to say, and potentially it would through negotiations with the landowners. But what we're saying is, for example, we will support you on this property if you do A, B, and C on the other property. If that sort of clarifies it a little bit.
Yeah, I just want to note to Mr. Aiello, I understand the safety aspect of this, and realize that from your perspective, you're probably wondering what we're all talking about because you've only come here to ask for a new parking lot to make it safer for your employees to
Yeah,
get
and I'd like to speak to your concerns. I mean, regardless of this parking space, the issues that we have with dust and noise, we take those complaints very seriously. I've only been with Ecom since March, but we've only had one dust complaint in that time. It was investigated and it actually didn't come from our property, but we have, since I've been here, we've made sure that we have a dust control plan, and we take every complaint from our neighbors seriously. We try to work with them when we do receive those complaints, and we will continue to do so regardless of how this application goes. This is for a parking spot space, our parking lot, to make it safer for our employees. And I truly do believe that it will improve traffic flow and traffic safety at that intersection. So I do think there's benefits for the city. I understand the neighbors' complaints regardless of this situation, and we will continue to address those as needed.
That's appreciated. I think that alleviates a lot of my concerns, and I support the application that's before us with those assurances given.
Do you have any other questions on the application to either Mr. Tenaz or the applicant? Madam Clerk, do I have anybody registered to speak in opposition to the application?
Mr. Mayor, we received 2 letters, one of which was attached to the agenda package. The other was attached to the addendum, but those parties did not request to speak, and neither did anyone else.
Okay, great. So council, I think you've all been given the opportunity to ask any questions you have. I think we've come to the end of the list here, so we will vote on the matter. All in favor of the application? Any opposed to the application? The application, Mr. Ayala, is approved. Thank you for your time tonight and your answers. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Agenda item 7.7.4, A1821 ZOP, 1525 Trunk Road and 834 River Road. And Councillor Shoemaker has declared a conflict with respect to this. The motion is by Councillor Scott and Bezo-Allen. Resolved that the report of the planner dated September 13, 2021 concerning official plan and zoning application E1821 ZOP be received, and that Council approve official plan amendment number 236 by way of a notwithstanding clause to permit personal storage on block 45. And be it further resolved that Council rezone block 45 from estate residential zone with special exception 254 to estate residential zone with an amended special exception 2, in addition to the uses permitted in an estate residential zone, permit a personal storage facility with road access from Trunk Road only, prohibit the outdoor storage of wrecked, dismantled, or inoperative vehicles, and that the legal department be requested to prepare the necessary bylaws to effect the same. Frank Chinook and Doug Leask, on behalf of the applicants, are on the call.
Okay. Thank you. Welcome to council, Mr. Chinook and Mr. Leask. We're going to start before we get to you with Mr. Tenazzo. Mr. Tenazzo, can you give a précis of this matter?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The subject properties are located on the south side of Trunk Road. They're about 135 meters east of Fournier Road. The applicants are seeking approval to rezone only the northwestern portion of the subject property. It's about 1.5 hectares in size to permit a personal storage facility. In 2006, the portion to be rezoned was part of the Rivers, and continues to be actually, is part of the Rivers Edge subdivision draft approvals. And this area was originally intended for personal storage for the exclusive use of landowners within the subdivision. And the applicant now wishes to change that to allow indoor and outdoor storage open, to be marketed and open to the public. The recommendation is to approve subject to the conditions that the clerk read. And Mr. Doug Leask, I believe, will be the lead on this application. And I also believe there is one concerned neighbor that also wishes to speak. Thank you.
Yeah, Madam Clerk, is it the Mark Stevenson I'm seeing on my screen? Is that individual registered to speak in opposition to the application?
That is correct. Mr. Stevenson submitted correspondence which appears on your addendum, and he has also registered to speak.
Okay, very good. So before we get to that, Mr. Stevenson, sit tight. We're going to start with Mr. Lees. Mr. Lees, do you have any representations you wanted to make to council?
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and Council. Thank you for having us. We have received the planning director's report. We've reviewed it, and we're pretty much in favor of everything that's in the report, and any issues that haven't been resolved today will be resolved at the site plan stage. I believe Mr. Chinook, the owner, was trying to get online, and he may be on the telephone. I'm not sure.
He's with us.
Okay, great. I guess having said that, we understand also that Mr. Tenaz received just today a recent comment from Mr. Mark Stevenson, and we're prepared to answer any questions on the application, which we're in favor of, and we agree with everything, or to help out with any other comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lees. Mr. Chinook, did you want to add anything?
No, I'm happy to, what Doug has said, and I'm prepared to answer questions from Mr. Stevenson or from the councilors.
Okay, thank you. Before we get to the councilors, I'll give you a chance, Mr. Stevenson, to make your representations, and then I'll give the councilors an opportunity to ask any questions they have of staff for the applicant. So go ahead, Mr. Stevenson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can you hear me okay?
I can, thank you.
Okay. I've made 3 points in my letter to the planning division, and I've spoken with Mr. Tonazo as well as Mr. Leesk earlier today. And I think some of the items that I've written, primarily number 1, can be addressed to my satisfaction, at least. The point that the planning report makes about not allowing or prohibiting storage of wrecked vehicles, inoperative vehicles, I think I would expand on that. My concern, and I will, if you'll bear with me, just make brief reference to the preamble, if you will, that I've made about the history of the area in terms of drilled wells. And Mr. Tonazo, if I'm not mistaken, confirmed that the original requirement of the first phase of the subdivision was that the new residents would be drilling to the first aquifer of 120 to 150 feet. And that was, at the time, that was a reassurance to at least me and perhaps others who were concerned about water supply, that our wells here would be safeguarded. I think it's fair to say that the wells in this area are, prior to the subdivision, are fragile at best. And Mr. Tonazo confirmed what I learned later was that, in fact, the new residents of the subdivision did not drill down to the first aquifer, that they were permitted, largely due to expense, to just drill a shallow well. And now we have a situation where 14 additional lots will be also drilling presumably shallow wells. So the background to this area, Fournier Road and River Road, is that there are going to be a lot of shallow wells drawing on the water. And it's my understanding that none of these wells, in all probability, will be going down to the first aquifer. So my concern is not so much with the prohibiting the wells going to that depth, but I would like to see measures taken for these vehicles that are stored there. And I must say that I'm not in opposition to changing the use of that block from private to public. What I am concerned about is any oil or gas leaking from stored vehicles onto the ground and in effect running a risk to the wells that are currently there and future wells that are going to be presumably drilled. I think that an easy solution would be just to require of the owners of the vehicles, boats and vehicles that are parked there, that they have a pan of some sort under any oil or gas source that could collect anything that does leak, and that this could be monitored by the site operator, and so that if in fact there are leaks of gas, anyone who owns a motor boat knows that the motors are prone to leaking oil and gas. And I think the comment about the site plan or from the planning division that it meets all the environmental concerns, I think this would be a prudent step to eliminating any dispersion of petroleum products into the ground. So that's number one. Number two is a little bit more complicated, and that is the reference to 834 River Road. Well, I was confused by this because, and I talked to Mr. Tenazzo, and he explained that it's 834 is not really a hard and fast number. There's an 836, if I'm not mistaken, currently on the road, and then there's the next road, the next civic number is higher than that, higher than 834. But in fact, this is just a carryover from the original property zoning, I guess. My concern is more with access to the storage area from what will be an extension of Queen Street. And it's clear from the planning division that they would prohibit access to the storage facility from Queen Street. But yet it's also clear in the planning report that the applicant has indicated in future that they would be asking for a southern access to the storage facility. And I guess my concern would be that I would like to limit the access to the public storage facility to the trunk road access, rather than have the potential that it would be consistent with the recommendations of the planning department. But because 845 River Road is included in this amendment to the zoning regulations, I think it should be somehow eliminated, because as long as it's in there, my understanding would be that in future, the developer could come back to council and say, well, now we would like to develop a southern access to the storage unit. So that's one thing I would like to see changed. It's 834. I would like to see reference to 834 somehow prohibiting the southern potential southern entrance. There's already a track going in there. Vehicles have been driving in off of the Queen Street extension. So I'm worried about that additional traffic coming through there from the Queen Street extension. And my third point is really, I recognize is out of context. It's just, again, a historical note. When the original subdivision was approved, there were money set aside for park development. And I would hope that that point, while not necessarily germane to the application in front of the council tonight, would encourage councillors to, in the next matter of time when other reports come from Planning Division, develop the parkland, city parkland that exists at the foot of River Road, at the bottom of Fournier, where it turns into River Road, into a pedestrian walkway into down to the river. But I recognize that this is not particularly relevant to the discussion tonight. I'm just dropping a note or a hint to councillors that perhaps they could pick up on this matter at a later date. Thank you.
Thank you for your representation, sir. So council, you have heard from Mr. Tenazla, you've heard from the applicant, you've heard from a party that has registered to express specific concerns about the application. And now I'll give you a chance to ask any questions you have of any of the parties that are involved in the application. Do we have any questions, councillors? I see none. So we have the information up. Before we vote on it, Mr. Tenazza, I was going to hopefully ask you to speak to the second point that was raised. Well, if you could speak to both the two issues that were raised by Mr. Stevenson, one with respect to the wells, and the second, which is respect to the inclusion of that block. Are you in a position to speak to planning's perspective on those issues?
Certainly. So I'll start with the second one because it's a bit more complicated, but I think the answer is simpler. Basically, 834 River Road, which we call it. Ultimately, that's just a civic address, and you have to go by the legal description. But that block is part of the subject property only because that portion of the draft plan hasn't been registered yet, and we can't. When we describe a subject property, we have to describe it as it is today, not as it will be likely in fairly short order. I understand that Mr. Chinook and Mr. Least are working to register that. So when you look at your subject property map, again, we're only rezoning a portion of what we call 834 River Road. The remainder of it actually in very short order will be registered as individual R1 estate residential lots. So this subject property map is going to change fairly significantly in the next little bit. And then just to confirm, we do have a condition. One of the conditions of the report here, and I'm not sure what was being referenced, that the applicant was going to come in the future. I think the reference was that the applicant would have to come back to council in the future if they wanted to get access to the south onto Queen Street. I think it's fairly clear that condition number 1 says to permit a personal storage facility with road access from Trunk Road only. So I think that's fairly clear. In terms of number 1, the comments are certainly fair. We're of the opinion that really this approval basically changes it from being, indoor and outdoor storage associated with, for the exclusive use of the residents of the subdivision to public use. And so it doesn't really change much from what was originally approved. And also we're satisfied that the condition that no wrecked or inoperable vehicles will satisfy and will mitigate any potential leaks. Leaks can happen whether it's my vehicle in my driveway or in my yard or an RV in somebody's backyard or a boat. Those are all over the place, and ultimately becomes a responsibility of the owner or the proprietor to be on top of those kinds of things, because there is environmental legislation of what to do in the event of that. But I would certainly defer to Mr. Leask or Mr. Chinook in terms of some potential operational suggestions that were made by the concerned neighbor. Thank you.
Mr. Chinook, Mr. Leask, do you have anything you want to add to that?
No, I'm happy with Mr. Stevenson's comments, by the way. When in 2006, when we did the subdivision, we thought we would set aside a piece of property for outdoor storage for big toys for lot owners. What we have experienced from the people who bought the lots is that they don't want to store it in the area we designated, but rather they want to do it on their lots, which are about 1.25 acres. And I had the right to waive that obligation to move on to the storage designated property. And so we allowed them to do that. Nobody wants to use the lot that way. And with respect to Mr. Stevenson's comment about land set aside for park land, although we weren't required to do it, in our subdivision, we have set aside a lot, one full lot, as access to the St. Mary's River for all the people who live in the subdivision for their boats. And that's been there since 2008 when we started developing the property. Honestly, Mr. Stevens and I worked together in the past, and I'm quite happy to sit down with him and satisfy him about his concerns.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chinook. So council, if you have nothing further, we can vote on the matter. All in favor of the application? Any opposed to the application? The application is approved as suggested by planning staff. Thank you all for your time and attendance today.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, I think that brings us back to consent, correct?
You are correct.
And I was at Councillor Shoemaker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I believe I was at the High Bay lighting report.
You had it identified. I don't recall which matter you're going to next. So I think that is 6.4. Okay, go ahead.
Through you to Mr. Lamming. Mr. Lamming, you talk in your report about a potential hazard of the existing lights, which are about to be replaced. Has the hazard been mitigated, or is there a way that are we keeping people from the hazard for the time being?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, Councillor Shoemaker, the risk was identified and mitigating measures have been put in place in time for this change to take out and replace the lights in question.
Okay, and will the lights be replaced kind of immediately if we approve this?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, Councillor Shoemaker will be scheduling them immediately.
Okay. In the interim, is the usage of the field going to be limited, or how are we ensuring the safety of the users?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, Councillor Shoemaker, staff have reviewed with the consultant and put it in measures to ensure the safety of the bulbs that remain in place.
All in that matter, Mr. Mayor.
Anybody else in 6.4? Okay, seeing none, go ahead, Councillor Shoemaker.
6.6, naming rights for the Northern Community Center.
Go ahead.
I didn't have a question on this, but I wanted to commend Northern Credit Union for their good corporate citizenry. As you read the report, there's a number of things that stand out. They had the option not to pay for the naming rights during the pandemic as the center was closed, and they chose to anyways, and they had an option to increase the amount they're paying for the naming rights when the twin pad is ultimately built, and they've chosen to exercise that option, which means we will be receiving more revenue in the future from them, and they're involved and participating in paying for signage whenever the twin pad is open. So they really do need to be recognized, I would say, and commended for their local commitment.
Thank you, Councillor Shoemaker. I completely agree with those comments. Appreciate you making them. Anybody else on 6.6? Nope. Okay. Councillor Shoemaker, is that it for you, or do you have anything else?
I had two more, Mr. Mayor. The heat recovery unit at the John Rhodes Center. I'm just trying to find
6.7.
6.7. There we go. There is a financing spreadsheet in this report, Mr. Lamming, that identifies 30,000 to come from the Environmental Sustainability Committee this year, and then 30,000 as a budget request for 2022 from basically from the taxpayer, from the levy. Is it possible to make a $30,000 budget request to the Environmental Sustainability Committee next year for that balance rather than coming to the levy for it?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Council Shoemaker, it is possible. We did review that opportunity, and the Committee for Environmental Sustainability has a somewhat smaller budget at $50,000, and it's now open up to businesses within the community. So we thought that it'd be best to put this off to budget discussion to allow for other opportunities within the community. If it's the will of the committee and council to have that request go forward, that is an option.
Okay, and so if hypothetically it doesn't get approved at council, could the request still go to the committee next year?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker, that is correct. However, there would be a component with the grant application to have an approval of the loan portion of the grant application approved by council.
Right. Okay. So that would be the 180,000.
That is correct.
Basically, we'd back it.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker, that is correct.
Okay. That's my only question on that matter, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, anybody else in 6-7? Your last one, Councilor Shoemaker?
And then my last one was the Environmental Sustainability Community Development Fund request. I think that is 612.
Yes.
It notes in this, 612 under financial implications, it notes that $19,175 remains in the Environmental Sustainability Committee's budget for this year. And if no other requests come in, then the remaining funds must go to purchase trees, which is a great resolution that was brought forward at council previously, in my opinion. Are there anticipated applications that we're aware of? I guess it's through you, to you, Ms. Cormier. Are we aware of any coming down the pipe, or do we anticipate that this money might ultimately be used to plant trees?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker. We have recently just launched the online application form for the Green Initiatives Fund. There is one application that has been received that will be reviewed in October at the next environmental committee meeting. So we'll have to see what happens. We've done a bit of promotion on the city's social media for this new online application, just to have more of a standard, if you will, for all applications when they're coming in, so they can be reviewed with the same, the same metrics. And so we'll have to see what happens. But yes, as the resolution states, any monies left over at this time would be for tree planting for next year.
Okay, great. Well, I encourage any organizations in town to come forward and apply, but I do hope that we get some trees out of that budget this year. Those are all my questions, Mr. Mayor. I've got one other.
Sure, just gonna, anybody else in 613 before we move on? Thank you, Emily, for your participation tonight. Councilor Shoemaker, you wanted to comment on another matter?
Just, I was going to pull 6.5 from consent. That's the Plaza Electrical Services.
Yeah, we can pull that from consent, no problem. Okay, anybody else with matters on consent? Councilor Dufour?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just on 6.1, I guess the question's for yourself, actually. Have you had any other discussions with folks about this issue, whether First Nations partners or the province?
I have not. You have the extent of my communications on the matter, with the exception of personal communications that, talking to Chief Sayers directly. But I wasn't aware the letter was coming. I wasn't aware the request was coming. When I received the request, I told him he would get a response from me and I would put it to council. And if council has directed some support for this, I'd be happy to support it and to help him, really to help the treaty chiefs of the area any way we could to move this project forward. Certainly something that I'd like to see. It's good that the federal government's committed to negotiating this. I think we can all agree that it's long past time that the federal and provincial crowns resolve some of these very large, albeit challenging issues with the First Nation communities, not only in our region, but across the province, but we're just going to focus on the ones that we have direct partnerships with. So it seemed to me the right process for this was to put it to council. I can tell you a number of you reached out to me about it with the hope that you could forward a resolution. That Councillor Gardy and Councillor Elisa Vezo-Allen are working on one, and I expect one will be on our next meeting. But I haven't had any other communications on this other than what you see in front of me.
Well, thanks, Mr. Mayor. You answered my next question, and it's a resolution that I expect I'll be happy to support. I think that this issue is one that's not very well commonly understood. The issue of the treaty payments, the lack of any increase, and I think it's an important one for us to remind the province to come to the table on. So happy to support it. Thank you.
Yeah, judging based on the outreach that I've received from independent city councillors, I expect we will see it supported at the next meeting. Okay, anything else, Councillor Dufour? Anybody else in 6-1? Okay, anybody else with matters on consent? Councillor Gardy. And then I'll come to you, Councillor Nero.
Hey, Mr. Mayor, sorry, I was on mute there. Just 6.2, following up with Mr. Councillor Dufour's comments about the province coming to the table to address an issue. Your correspondence with Minister Tibolo in regards to the challenges we're having and the funding that has been provided to address the opioid crisis here in the Sioux and withdrawal management. I just kind of found it curious that your letter stated quite clearly that the $343,000 was not sufficient in your eyes, and I think in the eyes of a number of us around this table, potentially, and that his response essentially reiterated that they're providing $343,000. Is that the extent of your communications with Mr. Tibolo, I would think?
Well, no, I've spoken to Mr. Tibolo a number of times about this, about these challenges and the need for resources in our community. I read his response a little more substantial than that. One of the things that we talked about the last time we spoke, and it was with my colleagues from Timmins and Sudbury and Thunder Bay, was that they would be introducing a request for proposal to activate additional withdrawal management beds. And he does indicate that in his letter. So there's another letter actually that I had asked staff to put on the council agenda, and I noticed it's not here now, and I'll make sure you get that. And it was just my letter to the hospital. I referenced it in my letter to Minister Tibolo. And it was just indicating to the hospital that I had the discussion with Minister Tibolo and that an RFP was coming up, and that I was hopeful the hospital would see fit to respond to it. But clear that, I would support it as a primary step because they're the care providers, but really I'd be supportive of any qualified party, of any party who qualifies for the funding, applying for the funding, because we need the resources here. So I'll make sure that you also have that letter. But no, since this is the most recent communications between Minister Tibolo and my office, and I'm hopeful the RFP has come out. The hospital did confirm to me they received it and they were reviewing it. I had a discussion with leadership of the hospital about that, and I haven't had any further discussions with them because I respect their jurisdiction and capacity, and they were in the process of reviewing it, and they had indicated to me once they had done so we would have a follow-up conversation. So that has not yet occurred. I'm sure it will, but it is obviously a pressing matter in our community. It will remain something that's top of mind and that we continue to advocate for and lobby. And I think it's pretty clearly understood and I think agreed. Certainly took away from my conversation with Minister Tibolo that he shared the perspective that we need additional resources, specifically in Northern Ontario, specifically when you look at the more acute effects of the opioid epidemic in Northern Ontario relative to other parts of Ontario, to provide people with the health care that they need. So we'll keep on fighting for that. And we'll keep on making those representations, and we'll keep on lobbying, and hopefully we'll make some more progress. And hopefully this next round of funding that will result from this request for proposals, hopefully that our community participates in that.
Yeah, hopefully. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Anybody else in 6-2? Seeing none, Councillor Nero, did you have a matter on consent?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to note that if we pull 6.5, there's a bylaw that goes with that, 2021-179.
Yeah, I'm sure the clerk is on that. So we'll vote on that separately. Any other matters in consent, council? So let's deal with the consent motion, and then we'll go to 6.5 and vote on it independently. Go ahead, Madam Clerk.
Got a motion by Councillors Gardy and Bezo-Allen resolved that all the items listed under date September 13, 2021 agenda item 6, consent agenda, save and accept agenda item 6.5 be approved as recommended.
All in favor? Motion is carried.
So yes, there is no motion for 6.5. So what I did do was accept the bylaw under the consent section for bylaws.
Okay, so then we'll deal with it when we get to bylaws then, Madam Clerk. Is that your suggestion? Okay.
That's my suggestion, yes.
Okay, it's no problem. And we've spoken to the matter, so I don't see an issue with that. So we're through section 7 of the agenda. Then that brings us to section 8, which is the resolutions. Councillor Gardy, you're the acting mayor this month. I'm going to ask you to take over for a few minutes.
Sure, Mr. Mayor. So, Madam Clerk, where are we starting here? 8.1, I believe.
Motion by Councillors Hilsinger and Gardy. Whereas our community is very concerned about the incidence of speeding on our city streets, and whereas the Sault Ste. Marie Police Service has also expressed that there are increased complaints about speeding and that excessive speeding has become a community-wide concern. And whereas higher speeds contribute to higher risk of serious injuries and fatalities for pedestrians, cyclists, and motorists, and whereas many communities globally have addressed the issues by undertaking a Vision Zero strategy or creating a holistic community road safety strategy and speed management strategies, which include speed limit reductions, automated speed enforcement, road design improvements, public transportation improvements, and public engagement campaigns. Now, therefore, be it resolved that staff, along with the Sault Ste. Marie Police Service and any other required organizations, review and report on the best strategies for addressing these issues and present a plan for implementation.
Thanks, Madam Clerk. Just for clarification on my part, I am the seconder on this motion. Is it okay for me to proceed as long as I kind of reserve my comments? And Chair, is that fine?
Yes, that's fine.
Perfect. Councillor Hilsinger, if you have any comments, you're welcome to provide them right now.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Mayor. There's been a lot in the media, and certainly this is an issue that I've been passionate about, and I know others around our table, as well as many citizens in our community are passionate about the issues and what's happening with regards to speeding. We have different neighborhood groups in my ward and Councillor Shoemaker's ward, as well as other places that are really struggling with the speed of traffic and the dangers that imposes. And so Councillor Gardy and I have brought forward this resolution. I do hope that we receive the 100% support of council to really look at this issue in a holistic way. There are many strategies out there where communities and countries have faced this and how they deal with it. So that people slow down, that they slow down, so that motorists, so that pedestrians, so that cyclists, and anyone, with any way of transportation that they choose to, can ride, can walk, etc., safely. Enforcement is one part of that. It is not the whole solution. There are other things like road design and many, many other things. And the Vision Zero global movement is a wholly encompassing a way to approach this, and one ideal way to do this. So we need a strategy. And we need our staff to take a look at what's out there and create that strategy and come back, and hopefully that's something we can implement soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Hilsinger. Are there any other members of council that would like to speak to this? Councillor Hollingsworth and Councillor Nero.
I just wanted to say thank you to both councillors, Councillor Hilsinger and Councillor Gardy. I applaud you. This is fantastic and really great job for bringing this to council. I know that when you look around the city right now, I think it's the CAA group is giving out, I believe giving out, or you can purchase signs that you can put on your front lawn to say slow down. I have seen those in many, many yards, at least in my ward, Ward 1. And I encourage people to keep on basically raising this critical issue. But again, thank you to Councillor Hilsinger and Gardy for bringing this. Well done. I support it, obviously.
Thank you, Councillor Hollingsworth. Councillor Nero.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Mayor. I too want to thank Councillor Hilsinger and yourself, Councillor Gardy, for bringing this forward. As like every other member of council, I'm sure I deal with this concern pretty much daily through emails, phone calls, and speed is a very hot item in the city. And I'm very, very happy to see this motion come forward. So thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Bruni.
Thank you. And I do appreciate the two councillors that brought this forward. Speed is an issue here in the Sioux. Also, I hope the committee staff would review transports. We do have transports that are driving on streets that are not for transports. And I think that's an issue that's getting bigger and bigger. So hopefully the committee can come back with a good report. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Mayor. Yeah, I just wanted to add my comments and commend the both of you. I know you, Councillor Gardy, and I have dealt with a lot of speeding in our end of town, and seems to be happening more and more and more. So I think that this is a proactive approach to a problem that's gotten out of hand. Hopefully a problem that maybe in our lifetime we'll see go away with self-driving cars, but for now we don't have that. So I just wanted to thank the both of you for bringing this forward, and I'll definitely be supporting this.
Thank you. Last call for comments. I just want to sum up by saying, personally, as a city councillor, it is the singular most issue that I get calls about from constituents, especially, well, obviously in Ward 5 in the west end of the community. I don't know, but it seems that in the media these days, especially on one of our online news providers, I don't know if it's just because there's more coverage of it, but it seems that almost daily there's car accidents in town. Like, I don't know the reasons for those, but one can expect, I'm sure, that speeding contributes to a lot of it. We've had some close calls and some tragedies with pedestrians here in and around the Sioux. And, you know, Councillor Hilsinger's motion, which we seem to all be supporting, will go a long way, hopefully, to kind of stemming this problem. So thanks, Councillor Hilsinger. And we'll call a vote. Everyone in favor? Opposed? Carried. Madam Clerk. And that did pass unanimously, Councillor Hilsinger.
Agenda item 8.2, welcome to Sault Ste. Marie, a motion by Councillors Hollingsworth and Hilsinger. Whereas Statistics Canada data states that roughly 75,000 people left Toronto and Montreal for other parts of their respective provinces of Ontario and Quebec in the year up to July 2020, which is the largest migration since at least 2001. And whereas quoted in the Reuters website article dated May 13, 2021, small cities and cottage towns across Canada are grappling with the fallout of surging popularity amid the COVID-19 pandemic as urbanites flock in, driving home prices up. And whereas this occurrence has been coined as the Big Reshuffle or Great Reboot by Richard Barton, co-founder and CEO of Zillow Inc., who has stated the real estate market is showing a sign that people want a backyard versus concrete. And whereas Tracy Rutkowskas, president of the Sault Ste. Marie Real Estate Board, recently surveyed local real estate agents supporting the Big Reshuffle theory. And whereas Big 7 Travel stated on January 3, 2020, that Sault Ste. Marie is a top friendly Canadian city, and that the community is known as the friendliest city in Algoma, as depicted on the stone arch outside of City Hall. Also, they stated that this beautiful waterfront city is home to the kind of lifestyle that people dream about, an actual work-life balance and proper community feel. And you'll quickly feel that people are nice no matter what. Whether you've been born and raised here or just passing through, locals will treat you with the same kind attitude. And whereas welcoming those that have recently moved to the community may help strengthen community resiliency and reverse population decline. Now, therefore, be it resolved that city staff, in conjunction with local media, create a welcoming campaign that runs from September 2021 to December 2021, which may simply include a banner on local media, lawn signs, and/or billboards in the community and websites. The lawn signs should be available to residents wishing to participate in the welcoming campaign at a nominal cost of less than $5, where the money goes towards the breakfast for kids. This is not to replace the new immigration welcome strategy presently being created, but as a warm shout out that clearly states the community thanks you for moving to Sault Ste. Marie.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Councillor Hollingsworth, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Hilsinger, for being the seconder on this. It's a simple idea, just to basically say welcome to our new citizens of our community, but also to say welcome back to Sioux-wites that have moved back to Sault Ste. Marie. It's not to take a lot of time from our staff. It's just basically re-supporting the theme that we are a friendly city, and we do appreciate people putting their roots here, building a new neighborhood, a new basically home. And we really do appreciate them coming to our community. It's as simple as that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hilsinger. Anything to add?
Oh, just very briefly, pleased to support this. I think that, you know, we have these feelings and we know that our community is welcoming, and we express these things perhaps verbally or in letters or et cetera. But I think visually to express this, to ramp up that feeling that we really do care. We have a great community here, and we want people to know that we thank them for choosing us, for us to see in the public, our new residents and those of us who've been here for a long time. I think it's an important message to send. Thanks.
Thanks. Any questions on this matter? Councillor Nero, you can proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Mayor. I guess my question would be, is this a direction to staff to just go ahead and do this, or are we asking them to come back with logistics on how we would do it?
Councillor Hollingsworth, potentially, I guess.
Yeah, thank you. Based on the resolution, we basically are hoping that council supports it and that they would start working with potential media partners and just to, yes, start promoting it.
I don't know. May I ask Mr. White if he could comment on this?
Yeah, absolutely.
We're giving direction, and I'm not sure if it's clear enough on what to do.
So basically, you're saying, you know, what department may be handling this? Where is this going from here? Should we approve it? Correct?
Just to make sure Mr. White is comfortable with the way, the direction that this is going. I don't have a problem with the concept and the idea. I just want to make sure we're not jumping the gun by directing staff to do something where they should look at it, come back, and, you know, give us some options of what we can do.
Understood. CEO White, go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Acting Mayor, to Councillor Nero, the resolution as written would direct staff to just proceed with the matter. As written, it does not have anything about reviewing or report back. So staff would interpret this, if council passed it as is, as being directed to proceed.
And Mr. White, have enough information in the, therefore be it resolved of what to go, where to go with this?
Through you, Mr. Acting Mayor, to Councillor Nero, I think we would be taking direction from the operative clause and interpreting as we can from that as to how to proceed.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you, Mr. White.
Anyone else? Questions? Councillor Vezo-Allen, go ahead.
Thank you. As someone who's boomeranged back and forth a few times, I do think this is a good idea, and there is a lot of us out there. My question would be for Mr. White regarding budget. Any initiative and staff time, and with the thought of signs. Signs are expensive, as we all know, as city councilors who paid for them when we were canvassing for election. So that is my concern is, what are the expenditures expected? And even if we do an online campaign with media partners, that will obviously possibly come at a price. They're not necessarily going to do that for free. So could you please elaborate on budget, because this is obviously not something that's in regular budget.
Through you, Mr. Acting Mayor, to Councillor Vezo-Allen. That is correct. As written, all I could tell you is we would look at what council was directing us to do. We would try and assess what the costs would be. And if the costs were going to hit a certain threshold, anything above nominal, we would need to come back to council and report that out to you and get your approval to proceed.
Okay, thanks, Malcolm.
Mr. Mayor, I'll turn things over.
Thanks, Councillor Gardy. To the mover and the seconder, would you be comfortable if there was a friendly amendment to your motion to ask staff to assess the proposal and report back to council on an implementation plan and the cost relating to it?
Yes, I would, if possible, to bring it back by the next meeting, or at least by mid-October, and then extend the campaign, hypothetically.
I don't think it'd be possible to bring it back for the next meeting, only in that gives staff, based on the timelines they have to follow with the reports that are due to the CEO, that would give staff essentially a week to work on it. I think I'll go to the CEO and ask him when he's comfortable committing to have a report back. Mr. White?
To you, Mr. Mayor and Council, we can commit to having a report back the first meeting of October.
Is that satisfactory to you, Councillor Hollingsworth?
I think that's perfect.
Okay, so Councillor Hilsing, are you comfortable with the report back from staff outlining the program they would follow and the costs relating thereto?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, so with the motion adjusted accordingly, do we have any further questions from council on it, or concerns from council? So we can call the vote. I think is available on your e-scribe. All in favor of the motion as amended? Motion's carried. Thank you. I think that brings us, Madam Clerk, to the bylaws.
That's correct. I will just read the consent motion. So it's a motion by Councillors Gardy and Dufour resolved that all bylaws under item 11 of the agenda under date September 13, 2021, save and except bylaw 2021-179 be approved.
All in favor? Carried.
And bylaw 2021-179 is an agreement, PUC Electrical Services, the Downtown Plaza. The motion is by Councillors Gardy and Dufour, resolved that bylaw 2021-179 being a bylaw to authorize the execution of the agreement between the City and PUC Services, Inc. for the electrical servicing for the Downtown Plaza be passed in open council this 13th day of September 2021.
All in favor? Okay, opposed? And you can mark that on e-scribe. The vote carries 6-5. Okay.
And we did pass a motion for a closed session at 4 o'clock, and council will reconvene in closed session to discuss 2 items concerning the disposition of land.
Okay. Good night, council.
And-
Good night to everybody who watched. Thank you for participating in tonight's evening. Council, I'll see you this evening's meeting. I'm sorry, council, I'll see you in closed shortly.